Now, can you, as a reporter yourself, working at a paper of record, can you talk a bit about the how the access game is played? How come a person like you are not invited onto Morning Joe or Rachel Maddow to talk about an article, but these so-called political experts who are bought and paid for not by MSNBC or any of the other big networks, but by politicians or interest groups? What is the relationship like, and how do you avoid it?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that deserves a lot more debate because, I did this story about so many different pundits with financial ties to the Hillary Clinton campaign, but really this isn't new necessarily, right? There's that big New York Times story over a decade ago about how the Pentagon was paying former generals to go on TV and promote the Iraq War. Right. I've done stories showing that a lot of the pundits that go on television and talk about energy and climate change are quietly taking money from oil companies and coal companies. The big crisis in the media and in journalism overall is that the folks that are being asked to provide a comment, for example, on single payer, they aren't health experts, they aren't health policy experts. They're just talking heads that are former political consultants, many of them on the take from industry, and they just yell talking points back and forth. They don't really explain the underlying policy behind these issues. So, I'm talking about this story touched on the Hillary Clinton-ish dynamic here, but this is a larger crisis in cable news. They aren't interested in actual thoughtful debate. They aren't interested in bringing actual experts on. They just want to basically serve entertainment that masquerades as news. So that's why a certain number of journalists are not asked to come on that often, but they would prefer to have just people who are good at spouting talking points and I guess boosting ratings by having non-controversial statements that just kind of feed into the horse race.
And that's oh, go ahead and let's get your line.
So a week ago, one of the men, I'm as bad with names as Ben is, one of the men who broke Watergate over at the Washington Post, he released a book about Hillary Clinton, and he was brought on CNN, and he talked about the transcripts of the speeches. And he called it Hillary Clinton's Watergate, not in the corruption in it, but in the fact that she's stonewalling releasing it, and it could hurt her down the line. Do you have to have brought down an American president and have integrity on the level of Bernie Sanders to actually be brought on as a journalist who will speak some truth about the establishment, or is there some other way that you can break through?
Well, listen, I don't know. It's a complicated subject because the media is not monolithic, right? There are a number of producers and TV shows that are interested in having divergent views and having interesting people who do speak truth to power come on, and it's a mix, right? Like some shows are much more hackish and others are better, but the kind of overwhelming trend is that a lot of these, at least cable networks, aren't interested in having a thoughtful debate. And, Carl Bernstein's fantastic. He broke Watergate. He's come on and talked about a lot of serious issues, and I thought it was an interesting comparison for him to talk about Clinton's transcripts and then relate that to Nixon's secret tapes in the White House and saying how both of them are fighting like hell not to allow them to be disclosed. That really raised the stakes for me, but it's incredible how slow the media has been to ask these questions. So I'm happy that we're finally having this debate.
Listen, I don't want to hold you too long, man. First of all, thanks for joining us. And the conversation that we had on Twitter really resonates with what you're saying right now. Because in a larger sense, the problem is that this is a big game to them. This is a big money-making machine, but it's also a game, and they're going to put up people who are going to just forward the narrative that they want to put up instead of having those nuanced conversations that, I mean, are we dreaming of a time that nuanced conversations actually existed, or did that time just never exist and we've always been stuck in this? Like, I don't want to always harken back in my mind to say that there was a time where we could have had complex conversations in our nation, but I know at this point we just don't have it. So Lee, I'll let you get the first word, man.
Well, that's a fantastic point. Just one last thing on this is that the gold standard in journalism is what your colleague just pointed out, Watergate, right? The Watergate story that actually brought down a president. But if you actually go back and read the stories, I mean, the first dozen of them were completely dismissed by the mainstream media. Everyone ignored them. And the Washington Post, to their credit, pushed their reporters. And I think I don't remember the exact number, so I don't want to get it wrong. But there was no single Watergate story. What brought down a president was those reporters working on the story writing hundreds of small pieces. I think it was like 400 to 500, and that cumulative effect of forced the country to pay attention, forced Congress to investigate, and brought down Nixon.
Wow. Wow, the persistence and so some of the same struggles that have always been here are still here, and we need more and more outlets and more journalists like you. Lee, thanks so much. Tell everyone how they can get up with you. I'm pretty sure they already know, but just for the sake of good measure, tell them how to find you and where they can read your stuff.
TheIntercept.com is the best way. If you click on any of the authors, or click any article, the author's email is at the bottom. You can find me there. I try to respond to as many emails as possible, and of course Twitter works as well.
Yeah, you're definitely doing the damn thing over on Twitter too, man. Lee, thanks so much for joining us, and for hopefully we'll have you back soon.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. Nice talking to you all.
Hey, my pleasure, my pleasure.
The other thing I'd say about Lee Fang is that Vice News actually talked about the last point he talked about regarding that you brought up, Nis, access. Why isn't he on Morning Joe? I wouldn't want him on Morning Joe, but why isn't he and Zaid and Glenn Greenwald on places like MSNBC, CNN, and ABC, and all the rest? And they had this conversation with Chris Hedges, and he said people like Vice News or The Intercept or independent media shouldn't want that kind of access. And this was as Vice was getting really popular. They just got interviewed by Obama, and Chris Hedges being someone who used to get like on TV, like Noam Chomsky, but like Noam Chomsky has been pushed out, and as America has moved right and they've stayed where they are, they've become out of the mainstream. And he talked about, when he's speaking specifically to Vice in this conversation, like, when you guys start getting these interviews with the president and you start getting invited to the press clubs and you get invited to these events, know that that's for a reason. Is that this popularity is enticing, and it's gonna start affecting you and how far you go with certain topics. Like, should we really cover this thing that the administration's doing wrong? Or we have stories we can do, like we can do another story about Africa or something. It's when you start getting that access and you start liking it, when you get more popular, that you have to worry about whether the things you started your projects for are getting undermined. Because when you start having that popularity and you have more power, that means your original goal, you have that much more power in achieving. And even a slight shift away from that original goal, even if for you in the moment doesn't feel like that big a deal, you're still you. You still really believe it. But that shift, when you have so much more power than when you started, is a big shift away from your original goal, and that to stay focused, and that sometimes maybe not having that access is a good thing. Those are the two things that I'd all in with. You guys know Dylan Darius on Twitter, Dylan Darius on Tumblr. Bernie's Revolution is the Bernie Tumblr, and apparently at the Chicago rally right now, people were handing out flyers that we didn't even make with berniesrevolution.tumblr.com on them, talking about Tumblr and to follow our blog, which is, if that's one of you, that's awesome. Thanks. That's super cool. Super hyped about that. Got some projects coming down the line, but thank you for repping us out there. That's awesome.
Most definitely. Dylan Darius on Twitter. I want to share a screen, and I just want to say we're getting closer and closer to 2 hours a night, and that wasn't really on purpose, but it was just, we have a lot to say. I'm